evidence pairs on the last passage can be pretty difficult because you're probably running short of time. It's usually a harder passage near the end, and these are just time-consuming questions and hard questions, kind of no matter where we are in the test. So if you are running short of time, this is not the place to waste it. Keep going. Move on to vocab questions, line reference questions, the figure questions at the end of this passage. There are going to be easy points sitting there, and it's worth way more than the 20 points that we could get from this. So this is a good example of a question to just cast aside if we're running short of time. But if we have the time, obviously, these are hard, and we want to try the best we can to kind of stay on target and have a process here. So one part of my process is whenever I'm looking at these line references, I always look around my other questions, think about the chronology rule, even just for a second, see, if it might help me. And in this case, if I go back to question 43, I was told to look about the ping pong ball in line 40, and so line 40 would place me right in here. So that's number 43. And that means that, okay, it's unlikely that choice A, line reference A, is going to be right here because that would be reversing the chronology. That would be going backwards through the passage when what we want is to constantly be moving forward through the passage. That's what it means to be in chronological order. So is that going to cross out A automatically? No. But again, if I were running out of time and I needed to make a guess really quickly, I would guess anything but A. So let's see. We want to make sure we have an understanding of what we're looking for as we go into these line references. So first and foremost, let's look at the question. The author most strongly suggests that the reason the scientific community initially rejected Higgs's idea was the idea, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so why did they reject Higgs? So let's go to 30 to 32. We still read it. 30 to 32, all the way up here. A. Instead, keep the equations pristine and symmetric, but consider them operating within a peculiar environment. Okay, what? That seems like I need extra in order to understand what they're talking about. It seems like they're telling me something bad, right? Don't do something. Keep them pristine and symmetric. So what does it say? Well, what to do? Here's the idea put forward by Higgs. Don't shove the particles' masses down the throat of the beautiful equations. Instead, keep the equations pristine and symmetric, but consider them operating within a peculiar environment. So this is not what the scientific community said about Higgs's ideas. This is Higgs's idea. So this is just wrong. It's not even talking about the right people, right? We want what the scientific community thought. This is what Higgs thinks. So 46 to 48. Okay. That's here. Zoom out a little bit. 46 to 48. In 1964, Higgs submitted a paper to a prominent physics journal in which he formulated this idea mathematically. This is a really interesting concept. So this to me is definitely wrong, and I would label this choice a what choice. Okay, it tells me what I already know. I know that Higgs came up with some idea. Okay, I know that. That's what the question told me. But the question is specifically asking for a why evidence piece, right? It's asking for why was it rejected. So I don't want to know, I don't want to just regurgitate the same information that's in the question. I need to add on to it. So generally speaking, where a lot of times there's a trap on these questions where there's a what choice that just repeats what we've already said and a why choice that's going to add on to it. And most of the time we want the why choice. So it's very clear in this case that that's what we want. So not only is B wrong, but it's wrong for a very common reason. That's, I guess, my point. So 48 to 53. Let's keep moving. That is literally the next line. Now, one thing that's interesting about this, that's here, is it starts with the word not, which is here, but there's a sentence in between B and C that we don't read at all, but it's really helpful because it kind of hits the nail on the head here. The paper was rejected. Okay, so why was it rejected? Not because it contained a technical error, but because the premise of an invisible something permeating space, interacting with particles to provide their mass, well, it all just seemed like heaps of overwrought speculation. So it's very clearly explaining why it was rejected here. Now, there's a lot of difficult vocabulary in that line reference. Some of it is about the science, which won't matter that much. Some of it is about more of the big picture stuff of why it was rejected. I do think, though, that there is one word in line reference C that we should kind of highlight, and that's the word speculation. All right, so why was it rejected? It was speculation. And that might be something you write down here just so that you have kind of a memory of what you read. So I'm summarizing here in a way. I'm taking all this extra stuff that's very confusing and trying to condense it into something more understandable, and we'll worry about the details later. So for now, that seems like a good choice. Let's look at D though, 67 to 70. It's all the way down here. The physics community had, for the most part, fully bought into the idea that there was a Higgs field permeating space. Well, that's clearly wrong because it's not saying that they rejected his idea. They're saying they embraced it. They bought into it. So this is later on. What we want is why it was initially rejected. Choice D is talking about why it was later accepted. Wrong idea. So this is rare. We don't usually get into a situation, especially on a harder question and a harder passage, where we know that we have the right line reference, but I do think that this happens here. You always want to keep an open mind, but I'm pretty sure that C is going to be the one. So now I'm looking for an answer choice in number 44 that matches with line reference C in number 45. So let's take a look, and as always, we'll look for strong words, things like that. Why was it initially rejected? Because it addressed a problem unnoticed by other physicists. Well, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say they didn't notice it. I mean, it's just saying that, again, it was speculation. So other people might have had different explanations, but it doesn't say that they were like surprised by this problem. So that word unnoticed, I would need some evidence of that. B, it only worked if the equations were flawless. Well, we've got some strong words here. Only, flawless. Those things make me nervous just as is, because those are kind of like definitive words, very specific, that would need some evidence. So what are they saying here, though? They're saying there's no technical error. It seemed like speculation. So yeah, there's nothing here about the equations being flawless. Now, there was a choice that we eliminated early on about that. I forget where it was. A, I think. Yeah, pristine and symmetric. So they're clearly trying to trap us here, but now that we've narrowed our focus to line reference C, this choice is just obviously wrong. There's nothing about the pristine equations in this spot. C, it rendered accepted theories in physics obsolete. Another strong word. Look at those words, flawless, obsolete. Those are very demanding. We need to make sure we have evidence of that. Is it really making everything else obsolete? No, it's not saying that. It's not saying that it's going against any other theories in line reference C. Again, it's saying that it's speculation. But to say that other theories are now obsolete, that's a very strong claim, and we would really need evidence of that. So that leaves us with D. Appeared to have little empirical basis. And here's the problem with this choice and why people get this question wrong, is they're so afraid of that word empirical that they just refuse to pick this choice. Because they have no idea what it means, they will take any of those other really bad answers because at least they understand them. And that is a very bad way of thinking on the SAT, right? We don't necessarily want to pick the hardest, most confusing sounding choice. That's not the strategy here. But we might need to pick a confusing, hard to understand choice when all of the ones that we do understand fail to match. They don't live up to it. They are proven wrong. And here's a case where I am certain that A, B, and C are wrong without any doubt. And so whether I know what empirical means or not, I have no choice. I've got to pick D because it could be right and the others cannot be right. So that's okay. That's why it's good that it's a multiple choice test. We don't need to understand everything to be able to get answers right. We just use process elimination. So what does empirical mean? This is actually a really good word to know for the SAT. This kind of reminds me of the old version of the SAT where you had to study a million vocabulary flashcards. Empirical would definitely be in those flashcards. If something is empirical, it is provable through experiment. It is, how can I say this? Like, observable. 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 Meaning like we can do an experiment and see something, see some change or demonstrate in a way that a person could actually witness the change happen. And so why is that? Why does that match with the line reference? Well, it appeared to have little empirical basis. So the theory the community rejected Higgs's idea because it couldn't be proven. It couldn't be experimented on. It couldn't be observed, right? That's what we're saying with that word empirical. So let's go back to C. It was rejected not because it contained an error, but because the premise of blah, 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 blah seemed like overwrought speculation, meaning he didn't have evidence that he was right. He didn't have an experiment or something proving he was right. He was just theorizing and kind of imagining this situation, right? Because look at the other parts that are also kind of hard to understand. An invisible, right, can't be seen, can't be observed, something permeating space, interacting with particles to provide their mass, just seemed like heaps of overwrought speculation. So he's talking about a field that you cannot see, that you cannot observe, and he's saying that this is my idea, and the scientific community is saying, wait a minute, that not so fast, that's kind of crazy, that's a big leap, we need evidence of this. And so they didn't accept his idea, they initially rejected it because it wasn't observable and provable. And that's a big idea. That's a big concept in science overall. And so this, especially with particles and atoms and things like that, sometimes they make theories up and then they have to prove them later. And that's kind of what the whole passage is about. But that word speculation, that word empirical, those are good words to know because they transcend this passage. They are good science terms to know. The difference between proof and theory, that's important on the SAT. It's important in science. So it's a good one to kind of just file away. You might see similar questions on completely different passages in the future.